What I'll do now is I'll reintroduce Melissa, because in a follow-on to what Eamon was talking about, Melissa's going to talk to us about achieving consistency in the assessment of skilled migration applicants in the energy industries. And Melissa works very closely with the Department of Immigration and the licensing bodies and industry. And we're going to hear from Melissa about the role of skilled migration in the economy, the limitations and challenges, and most importantly, how the skills being imported marry with this country's needs. So would you welcome Melissa McEwan.
That's right. Hello, sorry you're subject to me again. However, this time I'm much more in my comfort zone because this is all my day job. So one of the things about skilled migration is that we are operating in a very much global economy now in terms of skills, in terms of the way that people are looking for demands. And some of you might be aware of the Prime Minister's announcement of the Asian Century White Paper on the weekend. And one of the key things within that context is this idea that we are really operating in a world that is bigger than just our country. It's bigger than just our state. And we need to start thinking about some of these problems from a more global perspective. Skilled migration has been a solution for some period of time around addressing some of the skill shortages that we have in place. As Peter sort of alluded to earlier, it's not a solution that doesn't come without some challenges and without some highly politicised issues. I mean, Australia has a long and troubled history with migration, from the fact that, as Eamon was talking about, we had people who were here on a forced migration program initially, through to issues such as the White Australia policy, and now and refugee processes. We find that immigration is a really challenging, contested political space. And so that even while in some cases there's a genuine need for people to come into the country to supplement our workforce, it isn't without a whole lot of political challenges to make sure we do it correctly. What we need to make sure that there is also within this space, and this is one of the things that has been coming out a lot in the discussions around labour agreements and enterprise migration agreements within the resources sector, is that there's a balance, and that we get the balance right between demanding that employers skill people to fill jobs as a long-term solution to skills shortages, but also using skilled migration where it is possible to help projects move forward quickly. One of the things that Minister Evans, my minister, talks about is the fact that when you're in something like the resources sector processes at the moment, we don't really want to skill people to the peak of that employment, because what we're going to find is that then as that peak drops, there will be people who've been skilled for jobs that are no longer available. And that's where filling that top band is something that skilled migration can assist with, and particularly temporary skilled migration. However, it is really important to ensure that that balance is right. So Eamon's actually alluded to a couple of some of the problems. The regulatory complexity that still remains around our licensing arrangements in different states is a problem in the area of migration. And it's still something that we're trying to work to actually get a handle on. What happens to the migrant when they come to Australia, even with an offshore technical skills record? But there's also the situation where they don't have one. And it's actually quite hard to get a handle on, because there are a number of different pathways depending on which state's licensing body they go to when they arrive in the country. One of the potential solutions to that will be the national occupational licensing approach, potentially. However, that process is still ongoing and hasn't been resolved yet. And further, whether states still choose to do other things is quite possible. Sometimes you come to an agreement through COAG and I think everyone's on the same page, but you discover that people's interpretations of how that needs to be implemented can sometimes differ. There is a lot of complexity in assessing Australian qualifications against Australian requirements. Outside of, for example, this sector, but also I imagine within, people in different countries call the same jobs that we do something completely different. And it can be quite challenging to sort of even map what a person's expectation of their role is with what an Australian expectation of that role is. So that adds to the complexity of this process. And what we want to make sure is that when these people come out to Australia, they do have the right skill set so that they can enter into the labour market and they can be competitive. What we try to do at Trades Recognition Australia, and what I've said to my staff should be the way that we work, is by trying to look at people genuinely from the perspective that are they competitive with someone who is doing an equivalent kind of job in Australia? Would they be employable? Would people consider that they do have the right skills and experience for that job? It's not enough just to say, well, they've got a qualification that's similar, but really, if they go to an employer, will they be able to deliver what that employer expects from someone in that occupation? So just a little bit more detail. I don't know how many of you are familiar with who we are and what we do. Trades Recognition Australia is a part of the Department of Innovation, Industry Innovation, Science, Research and Tertiary Education. We like to call it innovation, even though some people like to see us as chocolate cake dessert. Okay, that's a really bad joke. We're the skills assessing authority for applicants with skills in over 130 trades and technical occupations. So essentially anything that is a trade level occupation, people need to come to us. We've had applicants from up to 200 different countries. We have a range of different programs. We have to deal with different visas and different cohorts from different countries, have over 15,000 clients a year. And I will acknowledge that some of the complexity that Eamon was talking about does come in our area. And there's sometimes good reasons for why there are different pathways and different approaches for different people, and sometimes there are not particularly good reasons, but more historically based reasons for the different things we do. Most of our work is for people who are looking to come as migrants and is part of the DIAC visa process, but some of it is also for some of the skills recognition programs we have also got a licensing focus. So our main programs are the Migration Skills Assessment Program. This is a program that is undertaken within the department by departmental officers. We have the Job Ready program, which is for people who have undertaken qualifications as international students within Australia, and the Offshore Skills Assessment Program. And what Eamon was talking about is part of that particular program. We also do a few other bits and pieces, and one program that is missing there, but I will talk a bit about later because I think perhaps this is an optimistic slide, is the Australian the Australian Recognised Trade Certificate Program. Whoops. So there is our that sort of outlines our programs and what they actually result in for the person who wants to undertake them. Most of them, as you'll see, are around providing people with a migration outcome. Some of them, however, particularly the Australian Recognised Trade Certificate, is primarily licensing. So just to talk a little bit about our OSAP and 457 skills assessment programs. These programs came out initially of a COAG process that was undertaken in around 2006, I think. And the idea is that while TRA has the overall responsibility for skills assessments, we will outsource that. We allow RTOs to act as skills assessors for us. And we have an approved network of RTOs who operate, and Future Skills is one of those. In the electrical areas, VetAssess and Victoria Uni also act as doing offshore assessments for us. The idea of the program when it was trialled is to try and facilitate a quicker licensing outcome by making sure that the assessments that we're doing for migration purposes also assess and benchmark against our qualifications. So essentially what people are doing is an RPL process that will eventually entitle them to a Certificate 3. As I said, these are our trial-approved RTOs, and particularly VetAssess, Victoria Uni and Future Skills International operate in the electrical trades. One thing I did want to add is that we have introduced an optional skills assessment service just this year, so that people who are not required by DIAC, and that's particularly in the 457 and holidaymaker visa space, in some countries will have the option of undertaking the OTSR process in order to get their provisional licence before they come to Australia. And Ireland is one of the countries that was targeted in that. Also the UK, the US, Canada and Poland, I think, is all. So the process, which Eamon touched on a little bit, is people do a trade set evaluation. And part of the idea of that is to address this sense of the fact that we may call ourselves an electrician in every country, but what you're required to do and to know as an electrician might be different. This is actually even more the case in the area of plumbing. We do find that plumbers have very different requirements internationally. Then once you've done that trade set interview, you take it along to the applicant takes it along to an RTO, and they'll have a documentary evidence assessment and followed by a technical interview and a practical assessment. Although we only mandate practical assessments in the actual licensed trades, rather than for people who are cooks and chefs, and in a range of other trades, they don't necessarily do practical assessments. So the OTSR, OTSRs are accepted by regulatory bodies for provisional licensing purposes. There is additional training that's required along with supervised employment of up to 12 months. We don't require it to be 12 months. That's the length of a provisional licence. We require people to meet a range of benchmarks. Once they've done that, they can move on. However, some regulators have a more specific requirement of it being 12 months. Once you've done the gap training and the worked supervised employment, you can be issued with a full Certificate 3, AQF Certificate 3 for licensing purposes. And that's just a demonstration of how that process works. Essentially, the idea is that this ticks two boxes for the applicant. This process ticks two boxes for the applicant. They have access to a provisional licence essentially the moment they arrive in the country, and they're able to get to the country because they've also received a migration outcome. It's what we see as best practice because it's about assessing against an AQF qualification. But the problem is we need actual RTOs to be able to do it, so we can't do it in every single country in the world. As yet, we don't have RTOs who have those arrangements in place, and I sincerely doubt that we ever will. We also, for people who can't then go through that process, we have the Migration Skills Assessment program. This commenced this year, a year ago, just over a year ago, and replaced the Skilled Worker program. Essentially, it was aimed to bring in a bit more rigour into the way we did this work and to be more about benchmarking and qualification understanding. So we have a lot of applicants from a lot of countries. We go through an assessment process which tries to look at very much a evidence-based assessment. We look at what people have done. We have a look at what their qualifications are and who has provided those qualifications. We look at what kind of employment experience they've had and how long. So our process essentially says we receive a decision-ready application, we have a look at the qualifications. We're developing a knowledge bank of information, and we'd love to hear any information people might have had or have come across about occupations in other countries, because what we're trying to do is put it together so we can benchmark easily, but we also have some fantastic tools nowadays in terms of the internet and so forth. But we try to make sure that we understand how the qualification works. We then look at employment and verify that, and then we go through a quality assurance process. Now this appears to be quite a complicated diagram, but what it's trying to say is that when we verify our qualifications, we do put a lot of effort into making sure that they are what they say they are. We look at when they were awarded, we look at the title of the award. What we try to do is look at the quality of the system. Some countries, well, many countries do not have the same kind of rigour in a quality system that we do, but we try to get some kind of idea of whether it's an RTO that, or whether it's a training provider that can be trusted or can be quality assured, or whether it's someone who's sort of offering dodgy things over the internet. We look at comparable levels. We do try to find out, and we look at the, where possible, the actual subjects that people have undertaken to benchmark against the relevant Certificate 3 qualification. Once we've decided it's comparable, we then go into looking at employment verification. We want to look at the documents. We need to be able to make sure we can find that employer and that they exist. We have had employers who are apparently parks in the past, and it's terrific how things like Google Earth can make employer verification much simpler when you can work out whether the building that they're talking about actually exists. We look at whether they've been doing that work at the skilled level that is required, and we have a look at, we want to make sure that that employment has been paid. The fact, if it's just work experience, it's seen as less verifiable. So once we go through all that, we have an outcome. This is the kind of process that we deal with in looking at the qualifications. And then that's the process for employment statements. So it's quite even though we don't actually see or talk to the individual involved, it's quite a rigorous process to try and make sure that this person will be able to get a licence once they get to Australia and will be employable. Now, the Australian Recognised Trade Certificate, this has been around for quite some time, in fact since 1946. The program was initially established to deal with people returning from World War II who were looking to have trade skills recognised for employment and licensing purposes after that time. The problem is that, as you can imagine, the world has changed quite significantly since 1946. And while the program has changed along the line as we have gone, it probably hasn't changed quite enough. There are still trades that we assess through the ARTC which really don't actually exist anymore. We have many occupations which are less relevant. We haven't had many applicants, for example, in blacksmithing recently. The ARTC is actually now not recognised in New South Wales or in the ACT for full electrical licensing purposes. So we've, in discussion with industry people and with our minister, we feel that it's probably time to move on from using the ARTC as a method. It does mean we need to find a new approach though. What we are finding is that the majority, in terms of the ARTC, practical assessments are not done 94% of the time. The majority of time people are approved on their paperwork, and I must say that the rigour around the requirements of the Act for the ARTC are nowhere near the standards of the rigour that we use for the Migration Skills Assessment Program. One of the things that has also forced us to think more about how we can change this is that under the proposed NOLS regulations for the National Licensing Scheme, the ARTC will no longer be accepted. So its main point and the main set of business that we do will not actually exist. And one of the problems is that it is just not aligned to our current system. It uses different benchmarks, different requirements, and it's time that we need to move on from that. So as a first step towards doing that, we've established a advisory committee, which Bob is on and other people who are here, no doubt. And we are going to talk about what are the options for changing this and what are the possible ways. Because one of the problems is if we take away the ARTC, for many people who have come to Australia with no licensing outcome previously, they don't have a clear path or an easy path for achieving licensing. So we want to make sure that those people are not disadvantaged if we repeal the Act, and so we've got to try and find a way that we can deal with that. So just talking a little bit more about where we're looking to go in the future. In addition to looking at replacing the ARTC, we want to move to a future which has more streamlined skills recognitions. We would like to have as simple processes as we can, and that apply to everything. So the Australia in the Asian Century paper, which this slide obviously out of date as of Sunday, the white paper was actually released on Sunday. One of the key centre features of the white paper is a focus on skills and education and their importance in going forward. One of the things that is likely to come out of this and that we're quite keen on pursuing is looking at how we can work, particularly in Asia, to help develop their skills standards in a way that, while relevant to their local industries, can be very easily and transparently benchmarked against Australian systems. And this is this idea of moving towards more global occupation standards that allow easier transfer of skills and easier benchmarking. More countries are introducing national qualifications frameworks. Australia is still seen, along with Germany, as probably the leader in vocational education and skills standards. We've got a system that people are constantly coming and asking about and how we do it and how they can establish it. And what we'd like to do is work more closely with countries, particularly in areas of specific need to both us and them, to try and build those systems more appropriately. Having standardised occupational standards helps us, it will also help those countries. It will help immigrants, but it will also help companies who want to expand into Asia, where they will have a skills base that they can recognise already in qualifications that they understand. We also want to create a knowledge bank and to have a systematised approach to vet qualifications, to knowing how that all happens in a straightforward way. And we'd actually like to make that available to people who do similar work, who want to do qualifications recognition, and who want to move forward in those approaches. So we're developing a trial knowledge bank, which is incorporating all our evidence. Eventually, we'd like to be able to make this available publicly. So finally, where we're looking at heading, we're trying to make sure that all the processes that we undertake are aligned to the requirements of the Australian qualifications framework and the qualifications that are in the industries and being used. We want to make sure that our approach aligns with what your expectations would be for people who are coming up through the training system currently. We're also hoping that maybe we can find a seamless approach to licensing. We're very keen to work closely with regulators in order to try and find a way that when people come to Australia and are looking for jobs, licensing is not quite the mystery that it still is. And for us, the key thing is ensuring that we can get the right people who want to into the right jobs that we need for Australia's increased economic development. Thank you very much, everyone.